This morning, March 16th, I find myself standing at the center of the global energy market. The moment I opened my eyes, I could feel it. This is not just another military headline. It's a shock that reaches directly into the cost of everyday life. Gasoline prices, airline tickets, home heating bills, all of them are beginning to move. Hello, this is Econsum. Today, once again, we'll explore the economy behind the headlines from a first-person perspective. If you find this video helpful, please consider subscribing and giving it a like. Let's begin. The war between the United States and Iran is not simply a regional conflict. It is an event that has the potential to shake the very foundations of the global economy. At the center of it all is oil. Roughly 20% of the world's crude oil passes through a single narrow passage, the Strait of Hormuz. How can one small waterway destabilize the entire global economy? Let's walk through it step by step. Immediately after the outbreak of hostilities, international oil prices surged. Brent crude climbed sharply, and shares of major energy companies reached historic highs. Governments and international organizations announced plans to release emergency oil reserves, yet market anxiety has not faded. A single line of breaking news is now influencing household budgets and corporate balance sheets alike. Right now, the smartphone in your hand, your car in the driveway, and even the refrigerator in your kitchen are all connected to the price of oil. When crude oil becomes more expensive, transportation and manufacturing costs rise. Heating bills increase. The price of everyday essentials follows. A single shift in oil prices can place pressure on the entire structure of daily life. Each time tensions escalate around the Strait of Hormuz, global oil markets react instantly. If tankers are attacked, or if insurance coverage is withdrawn, the physical flow of oil begins to slow. Nearby producers may cut output. What starts as a short-term disruption can evolve into long-term inflation in living costs and even a broader crisis in global supply chains. Gasoline prices are already rising, and higher import costs will soon be felt more directly by consumers. At this very moment, individuals and businesses around the world are beginning to experience the ripple effects of an oil war. Behind all of this lies a deeper struggle, a contest over energy dominance and strategic power. Now, I am standing at the edge of the Strait of Hormuz. In front of me stretches a narrow, elongated sea lane. On both sides lie small coastlines and critical military positions. Under normal circumstances, hundreds of oil tankers pass through here every day, carrying nearly 1/5 of the world's crude supply. But today, the reality is completely different. Since the outbreak of war, the strait has effectively entered a state of blockade. There are no visible physical barriers, yet warning broadcasts and the threat of attack have caused most commercial vessels to turn back. Missiles, drones, and naval mines have created an atmosphere of fear, a sense that simply passing through could invite disaster. Shipping companies have become hesitant, and insurers are refusing to cover voyages through the area. In practical terms, the flow of traffic has nearly stopped. On the surface of the water, warships stand on high alert. Iranian naval forces and foreign fleets, including those of the United States, watch one another closely. The tension is palpable. A single miscalculation could trigger a major incident. As I breathe in this fragile, uncertain air, I can feel how one narrow strait has the power to disrupt global energy supply chains and shake the world economy. Financial markets are reacting in real time. Brent crude futures continue to rise. Investors are tracking military developments, ship movements, and security risks minute by minute. With each decision, billions of dollars shift across the global financial system. This is no longer just a news story. It is the point where geopolitics, the real economy, and financial markets collide. Oil and natural gas prices are climbing. Transportation costs are increasing. Market volatility is intensifying. And 1 month from now, 6 months from now, the consequences may become even more profound. A domino effect could begin, one that challenges the energy dependence and industrial structures of nations around the world. On February 28, I began my day in a state of tension, closely following breaking news from around the world. That was the day the war between the United States and Iran officially began. It was no longer a diplomatic standoff or a war of words. It was the moment when real military confrontation became reality. At the same time the conflict erupted, the Strait of Hormuz effectively entered a state of blockade. Iran's Revolutionary Guard issued warnings to oil tankers and commercial vessels, telling them not to pass. With the threat of missiles, drones, and naval mines, most ships chose to abandon their routes. Because nearly 20% of the world's crude oil flows through this single narrow passage, a global supply chain crisis began almost immediately. On March 1, the United States deployed naval forces around the Strait of Hormuz and announced plans to guarantee safe passage for commercial shipping. In practice, however, conditions were still too dangerous. Shipping companies continued to reroute vessels to avoid the risk. By March 3, Brent crude prices had surged sharply, and international financial markets reacted without delay. Energy stocks and oil futures experienced dramatic swings in a single day. Investors were forced to monitor military developments and shipping activity in real time, adjusting their strategies minute by minute. It was a clear moment when war headlines delivered a direct shock to the global economy. On March 5, major economies, including Japan, South Korea, and several European nations, announced plans to release strategic petroleum reserves. The International Energy Agency stated that more than 400 million barrels could be supplied to the market. Yet uncertainty remained high, because the physical flow of oil through the strait was still severely reduced. On March 8, Iran's Revolutionary Guard conducted visible military exercises near the waterway, further raising tensions. Naval vessels and surveillance drones closely monitored passing ships, and missile warning alerts intensified the atmosphere of fear. Commercial traffic continued to stay away. On March 10, the United States deployed additional warships in another attempt to secure safe navigation routes. Despite these efforts, actual shipping movement through the strait remained limited. Diplomatic responses began to take shape across the international community, but the economic impact of the blockade was already spreading through real markets. Now, as of March 16, both financial markets and energy markets remain on high alert. Oil prices continue their upward climb. Investors are reacting in real time to military updates, ship movements, and the outcomes of emergency international meetings. It has become increasingly clear that this conflict is not just a military confrontation. It is an oil war, one whose consequences are rippling across the entire global economy. Today, as I watch the unfolding conflict between the United States and Iran, I find myself looking beyond the immediate clashes in front of me. I am thinking about the larger forces at work, the powerful currents of history, economics, and politics that have been building for decades. This confrontation is not an accident. It is part of a long pattern shaped by oil, power, and strategic rivalry. My mind first turns to the 1980s and the Iran-Iraq War. Even then, the Strait of Hormuz was one of the most critical arteries of global energy supply. When fighting intensified, oil prices surged almost overnight. The international community suddenly realized how vulnerable the world economy was to disruptions in energy flows. Governments began to rethink energy security. Strategic reserves were considered essential. Military options were openly discussed. The lesson was clear then, and it remains clear today. War and energy supply chains are deeply interconnected. The same pattern appeared again in the 1990s during the Gulf War. Iraq's invasion of Kuwait and attempts to influence control over regional shipping routes sent shockwaves through global oil markets. For a brief but intense period, the world economy experienced serious instability. Today, the effective blockade of the Strait of Hormuz carries a similar meaning. It is not simply a military event. It is an economic threat with global consequences. Moving into the 2000s and 2010s, another layer of history becomes relevant: the experience of financial crises and volatile energy markets. During those turbulent years, we saw how oil prices, exchange rates, and financial market volatility could amplify one another in powerful feedback loops. That memory helps explain what we are witnessing now. As news of conflict and shipping disruptions spreads, financial markets and crude oil prices react almost instantly. Past experience is functioning like real-time data, guiding investor behavior in the present. Political dynamics are equally important. Under years of sanctions and strategic pressure, Iran has repeatedly used energy leverage as a tool of national strategy. Control over the Strait of Hormuz is not merely symbolic military positioning. It represents the long-standing possibility of turning oil supply into geopolitical influence. On the other side, the United States and its allies understand that maintaining safe navigation through this region is essential for the stability of the global economy. What we are seeing is not just a bilateral conflict. It is a struggle tied to global energy leadership and economic security. As I look across the waters and nearby ports today, memories of past crises seem to overlap with the present moment. From the 1980s to the 2010s, one common thread runs through each episode. Energy supply chains have consistently served as a central instrument in both warfare and political confrontation. The situation today is no different. With the Strait of Hormuz effectively constrained, global oil prices are rising sharply, and both financial markets and ordinary citizens are feeling the pressure. The economic impact is especially visible in countries that rely heavily on imported energy. Nations such as Japan and South Korea depend on maritime routes through this region for much of their crude oil and liquefied natural gas. As prices climb and supply uncertainty grows, inflation, currency volatility, and electricity costs are all affected. Europe faces its own vulnerabilities as well. Its energy mix, shaped by past dependence on external suppliers, means that instability in the Middle East can quickly translate into economic anxiety across the continent. This is why tensions between the United States and Iran have evolved beyond a regional dispute. They now influence the structure of the global economy itself. Another lesson from past wars and financial crises is that short-term shocks often trigger long-term structural change. This conflict is likely to follow the same path. Within 1 month, rising global inflation and supply chain disruptions could become more visible. Within 6 months, industries and governments may be forced to renegotiate energy contracts and strategic partnerships. Over the longer term, we may witness a deeper transformation, greater diversification of energy sources, expanded strategic reserves, and stronger military commitments to protect critical trade routes. In other words, the ripple effects of today's conflict could reshape the architecture of the global economy for years to come. After the effective blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, I began to examine the global economic and military situation more closely. From a military perspective, the contrast is striking. The United States possesses a vast and technologically advanced defense system, aircraft carriers, Aegis-equipped destroyers, submarines, and cutting-edge reconnaissance satellites. Iran, on the other hand, relies heavily on the Revolutionary Guard and focuses on regional control strategies around the narrow waters of the strait. Naval mines, drones, and missile systems are designed to restrict access and create uncertainty for any vessel attempting to pass through. In terms of overall troop numbers and global reach, the United States holds an overwhelming advantage. Yet in a confined maritime corridor, limited maneuvering space and the constant risk of sudden attack can create a localized balance of tension. When we shift the focus to economic scale, the difference becomes even more dramatic. The U.S. economy, with a GDP of roughly $26 trillion, is the largest in the world. Iran's economy is far smaller, estimated at around $500 billion. However, its heavy dependence on oil exports gives it a unique form of structural influence. By exerting control over a single strategic passage, it can disrupt global energy prices and affect economic stability far beyond its borders. This illustrates a critical reality of modern geopolitics. Even countries with limited economic size can leverage energy dominance to influence the direction of the global economy. Energy dependence adds another layer to the story. Japan imports more than 95% of its total energy needs, much of it transported through routes connected to the Strait of Hormuz. South Korea also relies on imports for more than 85% of its energy supply. The United States and Europe benefit from domestic production and strategic petroleum reserves that provide some cushioning effect. Nevertheless, they remain vulnerable to sharp increases in global oil prices and prolonged supply disruptions. From the perspective of maritime logistics, the near halt of commercial shipping through the strait is already producing tangible consequences. Oil tankers and cargo vessels that normally move through this corridor carry not only crude oil, but also liquefied natural gas, coal, and a wide range of industrial raw materials. As delays accumulate, the impact spreads to electricity generation, manufacturing output, and international trade flows. Some shipping companies are rerouting vessels along longer paths, doubling or even tripling travel time, and passing rising transportation costs on to customers. Financial markets are reacting just as quickly. Brent crude has climbed above $100 per barrel, and both global futures markets and equity markets are experiencing heightened volatility. Investors are tracking military developments and vessel movements in real time, making rapid decisions that can shift tens of billions of dollars within a matter of minutes. Currency exchange rates, interest rates, and bond yields are also fluctuating unpredictably. For businesses and households alike, the economic shock is becoming increasingly visible. What matters most at this moment is that none of these developments are isolated events. They form a chain reaction. Military tension leads to restricted navigation, which leads to energy supply anxiety, which drives oil prices higher, which fuels financial market instability, which ultimately reaches consumers and industrial production. Step by step, across the timeline of this conflict, the pressure is building and expanding. What began as a geopolitical confrontation is evolving into a broader economic test for nations, markets, and ordinary lives around the world. As the effective blockade of the Strait of Hormuz continues, I am watching the global economy begin to tremble in a chain reaction. This shock is not limited to higher oil prices alone. Instead, it is creating different economic domino effects in different countries. Let's begin with the United States. As the world's largest economy and one of the leading oil producers, America has some ability to cushion the initial impact through domestic production and strategic petroleum reserves. However, the surge in global crude prices is already increasing costs for refineries and transportation companies. Over time, export-oriented industries and overall industrial output may also begin to feel the pressure. For consumers, the effects are becoming personal. Rising gasoline prices and higher electricity bills are placing new strain on household budgets and reshaping everyday spending decisions. China faces a different kind of challenge. With a high dependence on imported energy and an economic structure centered on large-scale manufacturing, the consequences are appearing more rapidly. Shipping delays through the Strait of Hormuz are reducing factory utilization rates, while export logistics are becoming more complicated and unpredictable. Because China is deeply integrated into global supply networks, these disruptions can quickly spread to manufacturing sectors in other countries that rely on Chinese production and trade. Japan is another key example. As one of the world's largest importers of liquefied natural gas, it depends heavily on maritime routes connected to the strait. With LNG deliveries delayed, electricity costs and manufacturing expenses are beginning to rise simultaneously. At a time when inflationary pressure is already elevated, due to higher fuel prices, additional supply disruptions could slow the pace of economic recovery. Europe is facing similar concerns. In recent years, efforts to reduce reliance on Russian gas have increased the importance of energy imports from the Middle East. Now, the blockade is once again highlighting vulnerabilities in Europe's energy supply chains. Manufacturing-driven economies such as Germany and France may struggle to avoid slower growth as energy costs climb and industrial production encounters obstacles. South Korea is also experiencing immediate economic pressure. With a high level of dependence on imported energy, rising prices for crude oil and LNG are pushing up electricity and gas tariffs. Import costs and transportation expenses are increasing, leading to broader inflationary trends, currency fluctuations, disruptions in industrial output, and heightened volatility in financial markets. Ultimately, these changes are being felt directly in the daily lives of ordinary citizens. From a supply chain perspective, the impact of the Strait of Hormuz blockade extends far beyond oil prices. Delays in the transport of energy resources, including crude oil, liquefied natural gas, and other key commodities, are affecting air, sea, and land logistics systems around the world. Manufacturers are waiting longer for raw materials. Export shipments of finished goods are being postponed. Financial markets and trade relationships are becoming more tightly entangled, creating a global economic environment that feels increasingly fragile. What we are witnessing is not a short-term disturbance. It is a cascading effect within a modern economic system defined by deep interdependence among nations. The disruption of a single strategic waterway is now influencing inflation, industrial production, financial markets, and the everyday experiences of citizens across the globe. This is the reality of today's interconnected economy, where localized conflict can send shockwaves through the entire structure of global growth and stability. Right now, as I follow movements in U.S. financial markets and global energy prices, I am beginning to see signs of a significant shift. With military tensions involving Iran showing signs of lasting longer than many expected, international oil prices are once again facing upward pressure. And that pressure is quickly finding its way into key indicators of the American economy. First, there is the movement of financial markets and the strength of the US dollar. As uncertainty surrounding the conflict grows, global investors are increasingly turning towards safe haven assets. In this environment, the dollar is showing signs of renewed strength. While this trend can create challenges for overseas markets, it also introduces new dynamics for American exporters in terms of price competitiveness. At the same time, financial market volatility is rising. Investor sentiment appears to be becoming more cautious, reflecting concerns about geopolitical risks and long-term economic stability. Second, there is the impact of rising energy prices on industrial costs. Although the United States is one of the world's major oil producers, higher global crude prices still influence the cost structure across refining, transportation, and aviation sectors. If oil prices remain elevated, manufacturers and logistics providers may face sustained pressure to absorb higher expenses. Businesses could be forced to make difficult decisions, either passing costs on to consumers or adjusting investment plans. Over time, these developments may gradually weigh on the overall pace of economic growth. Third, we can observe changes in the cost of living and consumer confidence. As fuel prices increase, many American households are once again feeling a tangible rise in gasoline and electricity expenses. Because daily life in the United States often involves long driving distances and heavy reliance on personal vehicles, higher fuel costs can quickly translate into tighter household budgets. Energy price increases can also ripple into grocery bills and broader transportation costs, potentially reducing consumers' discretionary spending power. Fourth, stock market volatility is becoming more pronounced. As concerns grow about the possibility of a prolonged conflict, investors are tending to reduce exposure to riskier assets and adopt more defensive portfolio strategies. This shift is already contributing to price adjustments in certain sectors of the equity market. Companies that are particularly sensitive to energy costs are facing increased uncertainty in their earnings outlook. Taken together, the changes now emerging in the U.S. economy extend far beyond the immediate impact of a distant military confrontation. Through the channels of energy pricing and financial market dynamics, the effects are gradually reaching the real economy and shaping the daily experiences of American citizens. In many ways, the current situation serves as a powerful reminder of how quickly instability in the global energy market can become intertwined with economic conditions at home. It is a real-time example of how geopolitics, energy security, and everyday life remain deeply connected in today's world. Now, as I observe the rising tension surrounding the Strait of Hormuz, I am also watching the direction of the American economy and cautiously considering what may lie ahead. This military confrontation is not just a distant geopolitical dispute. Through global energy markets and financial conditions, it is already influencing the U.S. economy and the cost of living for millions of Americans. Several different scenarios could unfold at the same time. The first is a short-term shock scenario. If uncertainty around the Strait of Hormuz continues and international oil prices remain under upward pressure, Americans could soon experience faster increases in gasoline prices, airline fares, and transportation costs. Even though the United States is a major oil producer, the refining, distribution, and logistics processes are still closely tied to global price movements. As a result, consumers may feel the impact directly at the gas pump and on their electricity bills. Financial markets could also become more volatile. Investors may begin reducing exposure to technology and high-growth stocks while shifting toward more defensive strategies in an effort to manage geopolitical risk. The second possibility is a longer-term slowdown in economic growth. If military tensions persist and energy prices remain elevated for an extended period, rising costs in manufacturing and transportation could gradually weaken the pace of economic expansion. In an environment where interest rates are already relatively high, additional pressure from energy expenses may lead businesses to delay or scale back investment decisions. Over time, this caution could influence hiring trends and indirectly affect the labor market. Households, meanwhile, may face a double burden: higher fuel costs combined with broader increases in living expenses, reducing their overall capacity for discretionary spending. A third scenario involves either escalation of the conflict or a diplomatic breakthrough. If military confrontation spreads across the Middle East, global oil markets and financial systems could experience sharp swings in both directions. Such volatility would likely influence U.S. equity markets and corporate earnings expectations. On the other hand, if diplomatic negotiations lead to a rapid easing of tensions, energy prices could stabilize, financial markets might recover, and consumer confidence and investment sentiment could gradually improve. Finally, there is also the possibility of new opportunities emerging. This energy shock may reignite discussions about expanding investment in domestic energy production, including shale output. At the same time, it is highlighting the importance of strengthening renewable energy capacity and modernizing power infrastructure. Efforts to enhance energy independence and reorganize global supply chains could create new avenues for growth for certain industries and companies. In the long run, these adjustments may even contribute to stronger industrial competitiveness. At this moment, the United States stands at the intersection of short-term financial pressure, rising living costs, and the potential for deeper structural transformation. For individuals, businesses, and policymakers alike, this is a period that demands careful judgment and strategic decision-making in the face of an uncertain global environment. So far, we have explored the economic shock caused by the effective blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the historical forces behind the conflict between the United States and Iran, the global domino effects now unfolding, the impact on the American economy, and the possible scenarios that may shape the future. Now, I want to emphasize one clear and important truth. This war and the unfolding energy crisis are no longer distant stories or abstract numbers appearing in the news. They are directly connected to our daily lives and to the stability of the economy we all depend on. From this moment, we can draw a powerful lesson. In today's world, global markets and energy systems are deeply interconnected. A single geopolitical event can trigger a chain reaction that reaches households, businesses, and governments across the planet. That is why individuals, companies, and policymakers alike must prepare for uncertainty with informed judgment and strategic decision-making. So let me ask you a simple question. As you reflect on the realities we discussed today, what choices are you prepared to make? Now may be the time to review your household finances, reconsider your investment approach, and strengthen the way you stay informed about economic risks. If you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing and giving it a like so you can continue receiving timely updates and in-depth analysis of the global economy. From here, I will keep following every development on the ground and bring you clear insights into how these events may shape our financial future. Thank you for watching.